Uh, welcome everyone to the BioTC webinar on positioning your company for successful fundraising. I'm Rob Bettigole, founder and managing partner of Elm Street Ventures. And with me today are Erika Smith, CEO of ReNetX, Sean Mackay, CEO of IsoPlexis, and Rosow, CEO of Diameter Health. Here's a general outline of what we'll cover today. Erika, Sean, and Eric will give a very brief introduction of themselves to be followed up later with a lot more detail. Then I'll share some thoughts on relevant topics of interest from a VC's perspective. The core of the session will be the fundraising experiences of our panelists, lessons learned, both positive and negative, and then Q&A, and hoping for lively interchange with the audience, as well as within the panel itself. We have a bunch of questions ready to go if we don't hear from all of you. So let's get started. Erika, over to you.
So just briefly, I'm Erika Smith, the CEO of ReNetX Bio, which is a privately held company in New Haven, Connecticut.
Thank you. Sean?
Hey everyone, I'm the CEO of IsoPlexis, a single-cell proteomic company based in Branford, Connecticut.
And Eric.
Hey, good afternoon. Eric Rosow, CEO and co-founder of Diameter Health, a digital health company headquartered in Farmington, Connecticut.
Great. Well, thank you all. I see I didn't start at the beginning of the of my deck here, so bear with me 1 second. You'll get a little preview. There we go. Okay, so as I said, I'm Rob Bettigole. I'm having a little trouble with advancing. There we go. I founded Elm Street Ventures in 2006. Yale is our largest investor. We make seed and early stage investments primarily in life science companies. We've invested in 27 to date. Most of those are in Connecticut, most around New Haven, and I think 16 of those have licenses to Yale technology. I've been in the venture capital business since the early 80s with a 15-year break when I was doing entrepreneurial things. I'm having a little trouble with the controls here, but we'll figure it out. To give you an overview of what's going on first nationally, as many of you are involved, being involved in the life sciences, there's been a tremendous surge in interest in investing in biotech, digital health, and other life science companies, both in the dollars that have been flowing in, as well as the number of companies getting funded. In New England, as you'll see in the bars, the dollar raise kind of matches that story. There has been, this is overall, not just life sciences, but there has been a little bit of a drop off in number of companies. And that's consistent with a trend we've been seeing of companies raising larger amounts of money, of big funds investing earlier. Unlike our first fund, where we invested, I think, in 2 companies that had large startup fundings, we're already I'd say the majority of the ones we've invested in now have much larger first-time fundings, and that's reflected in the numbers here. I am definitely having, all right. There we go. So some terminology. I'm not sure the audience and what people have done, but when we talk about pre-money valuation and post-money valuation, we're talking about, on very, very simple basis, the number of shares outstanding before the financing times the price paid per share. So let's say you have a $7 million pre-money valuation, you're raising $5 million, your post-money valuation will be $12 million. We see lots of people complicating this with how they count option plans or conversion of convertible notes. But from a VC perspective, if we're putting money in, the simplest way to figure out the pre-money is to look at what's the post-money, deduct the new capital that's gone in, and that gives you the pre-money valuation. You'll hear our speakers, I think, talking about that they may have done some convertible note financings earlier in their businesses. That's fairly typical of a lot of startups. Kind of pushes the conversation down the road as to what the right valuation is for the company, but rewards early investors with a discount on price at the next round, and also some accruing interest that also gets converted into stock. Preferred stock comes in different flavors, and that's really important to keep in mind when you're negotiating a deal. The preference means that the preferred stockholders get their money out before the other shareholders, before the common shareholders. But there can be participating preferred, in which investors get their money back and then also share in what's left beyond that. As far as thinking about term sheets and the documents that will power your financings, I think the best resource out there is the National Venture Capital Association's model documents on their website, free to download. They're just packed with notes that speak to both investors and to company founders as to what each of the provisions mean, what the options are, what the norms are, and looking through that. Particularly, you get a term sheet from an investor. You can see what's in the term sheet. What you can't see is what's missing from the term sheet. So if you go back to these source documents and compare them to what you've been given, you'll have a better feel for where you may have some room to negotiate. Due diligence. Due diligence is the term that we use broadly to describe the process of deciding whether or not to invest. Professional, institutional venture capital funds are fiduciaries for the money we manage. And so unlike an angel investor who can make a decision over dinner that they think that the entrepreneur is fantastic, they have a great idea, and they're going to write a check, we may come to that conclusion after that first dinner. We're still going to have to do the due diligence and go through business models, competitors, and a lot of other things before we make a decision to invest. When you think about raising capital, it kind of depends on where you are in the life cycle. And you see the full spectrum here from grant funding all the way to an IPO or an acquisition. But you can see where venture capital investors primarily play, which is the basic research has generated an idea. There's some proof of concept. It's really the early stage development and beyond where the venture capital investors get involved. So what do we look for? If I had to summarize all of it, it's all about the people. Stan Pratt started what used to be the Bible for venture capitalists, venture economics. Here's his observation that it's management. And just by way of example, one of my first deals back in the 80s was a semiconductor company called Maxim Integrated Products. It was just acquired by Analog Devices, or it's underway right now for $21 billion. It's been a long road from the mid 80s to now. But the company started with a CEO who had been the number 5 employee at Fairchild, which was the first semiconductor company. He was he had just been CEO of Intersil, which was another semiconductor company. Deeply experienced executive. He took with him his head of sales, his head of engineering, and 17 top designers. And they were going into a world where that was more and more digital, but needed to sense its environment and needed to be able, from the digital side, to be able to control power and also to minimize the use of power. So they went into they were going into an expanding, very exciting market with strong intellectual property, not so much in patents, but in people that knew what they were doing in building things, and a great deal of experience on the management side. So great team. We look for that. It's not just experience though. I usually feel that you can't just start with an idea and then hire a team. Somebody's got to bring passion to it, and that because there are ups and downs. and sometimes the downs are pretty tough. And getting through those it takes at least one person, hopefully more of a team, that has this passion and commitment to be successful. They care about the people that work with them. They care about their ultimate customers, whether they're patients, health systems, or consumers. We look for good-sized market opportunities. So, and this will get to one of the other points on this slide, which is alignment of interest. Ours is a smaller fund. We're a $32 million fund currently. So we can have an attractive exit, a company that's going to address a market and get to $100 or $200 million exit. We can all do very, very well. Larger funds that are managing $800 million, $1 billion, they're looking for $1 billion exits. And so the market opportunity has to match with their needs. So kind of skipping ahead to that bullet of alignment of interest, that's one of many points, touch points, where as you're looking for investors and they're looking at you, is really assessing whether you're thinking the same way. Sustainable competitive advantage is often this bullet would be labeled as IP, intellectual property, by which most people mean patents. How do you protect your invention? That's particularly important in biotech and therapeutics. Less so in many other businesses where it's know-how, it's customer relationships, it's team that provides that competitive advantage. It can be market position if you're first to the market. Financing plan. We don't want to, we VCs in general don't want to finance something part way to an important milestone. We want to get to an inflection point in value, raise the next slug of money that the company needs to grow when proof points have been reached. And that can be passing a key development milestone in terms of technology. It can be in therapeutics for proof of principle in humans with the first phase 1 trial, whether that's a safety signal or an efficacy signal. It could be a strategic partnership, but financing to one of those, and not just to one of those points in time, but with a 6-month cushion. It's what we usually like to see beyond that for all the things that are going to go not according to plan, to give you time to raise the next round and avoid having to do some sort of scramble to bridge the gap. We also look for plans that are addressing the tough issues early on. Venture capitalists expect to lose all of their money and some of their investments, break even or make 2 or 3 times their money in maybe a third of their investments, and then have some 5, 6x and 10x home runs in the rest of their portfolio. So weeding out ones that aren't going to make it early on is really important for the overall portfolio. And it's important for entrepreneurs too. You're going to spend a big chunk of your life on this. So address those early things early on. We also care about who we co-invest with. We want to see investors that can help the company with contacts, with business experience, with connections to both customers, team members, and for companies, which is most of them, that are going to need to raise capital over a number of rounds of financing, investors that, like us, are in for the long haul. Investors that talk about early exits. And actually, frankly, for us, we hear people talking, entrepreneurs who say, we're just going to do X, Y, and Z, and we're going to flip this investment and sell it to somebody. It really turns us off. We're long-term investors. It takes time to build businesses, and we expect to hear that approach from the people that we invest with. So how you prepare, think about your team. It can't be artificial. It'll have to be people that you've worked with before, ideally. One of the big ways that companies fail is that the core team doesn't get along. You don't have to have a complete team, but you have to have a credible plan. You have to be raising enough money, be at the right place so that that is credible, that you'll be able to attract the right people that you need. Build a data room. One of the worst things is to, as an investor, is to have to tease out information from entrepreneurs. As if it's a test of us. Are we going to ask the right questions? If we come upon things that are problematic, it can be a real turnoff, as opposed to it's been presented up front. People say, look, here's something you need to know. We had, this happened with this person or with this experiment. People will accept that and move on. So build a robust data room and be upfront about data. What you don't want is this situation. For those who can't see the screen, I'm sorry, Mr. Aaron, but we checked with your school and you're only graduated first in your class alphabetically. And we have seen this from time to time, people making up credentials. I had a conversation with the lead investor for a company that completely contradicted what the entrepreneur was telling me. It was, it was sudden death of our interest. Try to be sophisticated. Talk to people like our speakers today, people that have done it before. Understand what's normal. Some of it's just simple things like what's reasonable in a confidentiality agreement. We have people that are so paranoid they don't want to talk about their plan, and then unless there's a CDA in place, and that's unsophisticated. VCs are not in the business of ripping off people's ideas. You need to protect your confidential agreements that you have with others, patents that you haven't filed yet. But you have to show that you've been, make it seem at least that you've been around, you've done it before. Think carefully about valuation. I think the best answer when people ask you, what do you think the valuation is what one of my early partners, long retired now, said, Mike Sherman, is whatever it takes to get the deal done. And it's, it's a market, a willing buyer, willing seller. So you really best serve when you're asked that question, say, I want to get a deal done. We'll find a price that makes sense for both sides. It's going to be a compromise. The way we think about valuation is looking ahead to the next round. What's the next round going to look like? Who's going to join as a new investor? What do they want to see? What kind of valuations, what kind of prices are they willing to pay for a company at that future size? And then to make it attractive to investors in the current round, investors want to see that they're going to at least double in from one round to the next, which is typically going to be about 18 months or so. And I like to think about it as valuation momentum. You want to see your price per share, your valuation go up with each round. If you overreach, I wouldn't even call it overreaching. Right now, it's a frothy market. Valuations are high, but you're going to need to come back to the market. The kind of froth in the market right now may not be there in 2 years. So make sure you've left room that you can, again, get a step up. You'll have accomplished a lot. You'll get a step up. Leave room going forward. And these are all things we like to hear. The attitude we like to hear from entrepreneurs as we speak with them. Make sure you build a forecast that you can defend, that the assumptions are things you really believe in, that you've vetted, that there's background to it. Some of the best things I've seen in whether it's a market assessment or competitive assessment that people put together are ones that are heavily footnoted, and they give their source documents. A lot of it are things they found on the web, but that makes it really easy to believe. It's a credible that the data is credible, and it shows the team's diligence in really thinking through and really understanding their business and the environment they work in. Of course, if you're going to be pitching people, do the work. Try to find people that know them. Find out what they like, what they don't like, what they're currently investing in, how much money they have in their fund, where they are in their fund. If you're pitching somebody that's down to the last year of their investment period, and you're like most companies, it's going to be 7 years to you or more till you exit. maybe they're not the best fit, but go into it talking to them if they've been interested, and address that directly, and work your connections. Get starting. Cold calls are tough. We get many emails daily of people just kind of throwing things over the transom. It rarely works. It kind of shows, hey, these people don't know how to find connections. How are they going to find customers? How are they going to recruit more people to their team? So those are some of the things. As I said, we're in kind of a bubble now. This is a great time in life sciences to be raising money. So I urge you to get out there and do it. And let's get back to the important stuff now with our team. So Erika, over to you.
Right. Well, thank you for hosting today, Rob and BioCT. It's fantastic to be here. So I'll give you a little bit of my background, then jump into a little bit of the fundraising experience with my company, and then kind of go on from there. I'm a biomedical and electrical engineer, and I have an MBA as well. And by way of history, about the first half of my career was spent in industry, in leading companies such as diagnostics, devices, and therapeutics, and really across disciplines, from manufacturing to regulatory affairs to mergers and acquisitions. And during my time in mergers and acquisitions, I actually absolutely fell in love with the commitment, the drive, and the opportunity I saw in entrepreneurs. And I leveraged that interest into moving into the second half of my career as an investor. I have been an angel investor. I also launched and led a life sciences seed fund with Johnson & Johnson money, having the chance to work with dozens of innovative companies. I had the opportunity to work at Yale with Rob and lead their startup entrepreneurial initiatives for students and faculty university-wide. And there with Elm Street, I had the opportunity to launch a seed investment fund, and also the $25 million Blavatnik Fund for Innovation. And while I was at that role, I had the opportunity to meet the ReNetX scientific founder, Dr. Steven Strittmatter. And given my experience as an investor, the first thing I did is let me check all the boxes that I think I need to know: the team, the opportunity, the technology, the IP, the structure, and so on and so forth. And for me, the deeper I dug, the more excited I became. And almost 4 years ago today, I quit my day job at Yale and jumped into this company with 2 feet. So I'm excited to share kind of our journey and our fundraising. As I mentioned, we are a privately held company. We're in New Haven, obviously science out of Yale, and we are working on building a new frontier in neuroscience by creating a new class of therapeutics that addresses axonal loss. Today, we've raised about 30 million. We've launched our first in-human clinical trials and have an active, expanding a multi-billion-dollar opportunity of pipelines. Let me just jump into our fundraising journey. I think we've checked all of the boxes along the continuum, except for the public piece, which Rob was talking about, and maybe that will happen at some point. But we started our journey with substantial numbers of grants with NIH early on. Actually, the company had it before I even joined. So definitely a critical piece of our program to doing the de-risking of the early science. We also were able to receive something called NCAT's Bridges Grant from NIH, which is a part of the NIH that actually does translational pieces. So basically, they know that there's certain assets, certain things in the pipeline, and we're working in spinal cord injury where there's not really investment. People are not investing in those areas. And so this program is designed to de-risk the program to getting it to an IND enabled asset. And so we had an opportunity to use funding for that. So basically all of our talks, all of our manufacturing scale up was supported with this program. We also had foundation support. So, really early, some other opportunities for other types of funding are foundations that are interested in specific disease areas that may or may not be very well funded, again, in the venture community. And so we were, our clinical trial, our first clinical trial was supported primarily from a group called Wings for Life, which is wanting to cure spinal cord injury. But all at that time, we also had support from Connecticut Innovations here. We've also taken in venture money. We closed a Series A. It was, I think one of the questions is, did you do a tranched round? Sort of, because basically we closed a round, got to the end of our first part of our study, and then closed the second part of our round just recently. So we've had, sort of a tranched plan in going forward. The one thing that I would note, certainly, we're in a great position having had the non-dilutive capital as well as the investment. But one thing that I wanted to note and make sure everybody's aware is, there's still a systemic problem in venture. I think the quotes right now are 3% of companies that are women-led, venture companies are women-led. So there's an opportunity here. And also for the NVCA just put out a report that I think 16% of partners are women. So, and that's not to say the other kind of diversity pieces that we need to concentrate on. So I share that because I think there's an opportunity for sort of the challenges that exist for certain groups of people in raising capital and making sure that you have solutions to work on that. And one of the things that I wanted to just make sure the group was aware of is BioCT itself. So thank you for hosting. We have a diversity initiative that's ongoing. It was just launched. We have put a survey out there. We really hope to create better networks for people so that this, you can, so to Rob's point, when you pick up the phone, you can pick up the phone to someone who may know you. So you're in that network, you have those right connections, and those take time. For me personally, when I started out, I worked with women in bio because there's a whole network there for women, and executives. I work with a group called Springboard Enterprises for additional women and advisors and mentors. And I'm now, kind of outside of my day job, I'm working with a group called the Bioscience Investment and Industry Group, which is really trying to change the path of venture and making sure that it's a very inclusive environment and making sure that, funding is there kind of across the board. So problem and solution and sort of our journey. And I'll pause and turn it over to Sean.
Sean. Thanks, Erika.
Sure. Thanks, everyone. So, yeah, a couple, I guess, background to start with. I lived in San Francisco. I'd done investment banking for Lazard, doing primarily working with life sciences companies, doing primarily debt restructuring. And, that I graduated undergrad. I'd wanted to sort of be a very early stage entrepreneur. Just didn't feel like back in 2005 or whatever that, I had the sort of technical chops or understood anything about sort of, how to really build a company. And so I worked with a bunch of them, and, my goal, I had sort of left investment banking about 2012 and worked in an early stage company in a West Coast venture capital firm's incubator, Kleiner Perkins, and that was for digital health, which was, I think Eric's, working on having success now. At 2012, it was sort of a different story. Like people weren't as receptive on the payer provider side, unless you were like a Cerner or something big like Epic. And the transitionary thing for me was, I wanted to be involved at a really sort of super early stage with something that was convergent between life sciences, which I worked with a bunch of immunotherapy companies and the like back in the 2000s. Those companies weren't working out at the time. It was a different era, as you guys probably know, for life sciences. And then something that involved both that and IT. And it just, it was a nice convergence where I was at Yale, met with professors, and there were some technologies that I in-licensed. First money in was actually, first money committed was Rob's partner, Chris McLeod, and first money in was the Yale Innovation Fund. So it was very like Yale centric. Yale Technologies was all the intellectual property until we conglomerated a few different universities that sort of there's that professor movement thing that happened. So we kind of needed to get that together. And then, the company's kind of gone in fundraising, a couple phases, probably a few phases. So we had a very small amount of capital to start with. We needed to sort of, show in a small lab that we could get to some proof of concepts with some pharma partners that we were developing relationships with. that helped us raise, that was like $1 million or $2 million in seed. And then, we had really our Series B was about 15 million. But the big thing that helped us develop our system was we got like 20 million in SBIR grants to couple with that Series B. So that was like super helpful because still at the time, this was the tools omics space that we're in, the life sciences tools omics space still wasn't like the industry in terms of raising capital. And then, the Series C, which was 2018, that was really between the Series C and the Series D, which that together was 185 million of capital for us. I think that was a period where our industry started seeing exits that were, beyond a couple $100 million. So there are a few exits starting that were like, pre-revenue 800 million. And then like recently it's been more like in the billions. And of course, you guys know, like when VCs see that, then larger stage VCs get into the space. And so there'd been really what happened was a lot more interest in the tools omics space. A few people in our area, single cell biology, started having more and more customer success. So when we launched, we were still pre-revenue, but we were able to raise a good amount of capital. And so as of today, we launched late 2018. We have about 120 systems in the field. We've been able to scale our revenues, to a mid-significant stage where we did a sort of a quasi crossover round just like a month ago with a few great investors that we're excited about. And then we have about a few hundred people. And so it's been a timing based evolution, right? Like when we started the company, single cell biology was considered a backwater that hadn't really worked out, I think, from a few companies that kind of came out in 2007 to 2012. But then a few companies, and there was one main company at that time that did single cell in a low throughput. And then a number of companies came out. We were one of them in about 2014, 2015, and the industry has moved forward. The other thing that's helped us is as we've generated a quick growth in terms of our CAGR, our revenue CAGR, the proteomics industry has been more trendy, right? For lack of a better word. And I think customers are excited about coupling proteomics with genomics. And for us, since we're doing proteomics at the single cell level and most people do genomics at the single cell level, there's been this almost like logical translation that folks have to say, hey, this makes logical sense that not only the revenues are increasing, but the addressable market's increasing. And, so I think that's been great. I think the last part, it's like, we've had really great investment partners, great sort of timing in the market in terms of customers understanding what we're doing and then investors doing the same. And then the third is the team building aspect's been really, it's fun. It's also for everyone, period. It's a challenge, different challenges in different places. I think for us, we brought on like, in terms of our broader management team, including senior directors and VPs and the like, we have 20 something people worldwide and brought on a lot of those in the last year. And that's been a fun experience. It's been great leverage. What we're all looking for here is leverage, customer leverage. They give you references, like you talked about connections. So these leadership folks have been a lot of great leverage. It's of course like it's this interesting sort of very quick moving environment in terms of the number of new customers that want to transition to new enabling technologies, new investors that want to be involved in life sciences enabling tech. So it's like it's definitely a busy place right now, but I think it's good. And as Rob said, I think if you come to the sort of the market with cool new tech, especially university tech and great team and great advisors, I think it's a nice time to be in the life sciences space.
Great, thank you, Sean. I'll have lots of questions for you and Erika and Eric in a bit, but let's get Eric on now because it's just we have Erika on the therapeutics, you on the tools side, and then Eric in digital health, and to give this kind of broad perspective, I think, on the life science industry in general. Eric.
Great, thanks, Rob. And thank you for the opportunity to participate. So as I mentioned, co-founder of Diameter Health, and my background in terms of the journey, biomedical engineer by training. I spent a number of years working at Hartford Healthcare, and then with a colleague, went off and founded our first company that we saw as a problem that healthcare was experiencing back in the early 2000s around patient flow and optimization of throughput. And Connecticut Innovations was our first investor. And we grew that company, and it was ultimately acquired by a then publicly traded company called Eclipsys, which has since merged with Allscripts, which is one of the big EHR electronic health vendors today. Through that journey, though, I met a number of great people. One of them, named John Demore, was my co-founder and colleague at Diameter Health. So that was one of the great fringe benefits of that chapter. And John and I worked together at Eclipsys and Allscripts. And then we both left Allscripts and stayed in touch, and actually went into the market with Diameter thinking about there's a big problem in regulatory about predicting readmission risk among patients. And we actually built a tool that was very accurate, had a CSTAT of like 0.85 in predicting readmissions. But it almost didn't matter because there are probably 200 other vendors out there that also have readmission, 30-day readmission tools. And so what we stepped back and learned from that was, well, why is it we have a better CSTAT? And the answer was because we had better data. And why do we have better data? Because we had built a tool to normalize and enrich and reorganize that clinical data. And so that was sort of the real kind of eureka moment of where Diameter focused and evolved from that point forward. Today, as I mentioned, we have our headquarters is in Farmington. We have offices in Wellesley. We're about 85 employees across the team. And our investors, again, Connecticut Innovations was our founding investor in our Series A. We did do a small friends and family round in the form of a convertible note. As Rob had said, we converted that into our Series A round. Probably should have called it a seed or pre-seed, but we raised 2.4 million back in 2016, grew the company more, did what we then called a Series A1 at the end of 2019. And that was actually led by someone might
Richard on mute.
Try to see who we can mute him. Yeah, muted.
So at the end of 2019, we actually had met with a number of strategics, one of which was Optum Ventures, the investment arm for Optum, and their LPs are United Health Group. And they actually led our Series A1 round, just under $10 million, grew the company more, and then this past September did do our Series B round that was led by Centene, another large payer. And so one of my messages to the group is if it's possible to identify ideally customers and or other strategics that could also be investors and frankly acquirers of the company, that's certainly, I think, a good strategy to pursue. But a lot of my experiences that I reference are similar to what Rob talked about. I've heard people say, bet on jockeys, not horses, make sure you're solving a broad problem. And really the problem that we solve at Diameter is this problem of too much data, dirty data, incomplete data. Just by quick way of example, there are over 1 billion encounters per year here in the US of clinical interactions, and there's over 4,000 data attributes per encounter. So when you multiply those, you have a ton of clinical data, but that gets even more variable because you have over 4 million clinicians documenting care, not just in Epic and Cerner, as Sean had mentioned, but over 100 other certified electronic health records. And so we've coined this term clinical data disorder, and it's really that we try to solve and normalize and enrich that data so that an HbA1c means the same thing in the same codification system, regardless of what EHR it came from. So at the high level, what we focus on is thinking about all this data is digital, but a lot of it we think of as crude oil, and it can be in silos, it can be in tanks, it can be in underground wells, but it needs to be refined. And really Diameter's positioned ourselves as that refinery to turn that digital crude oil into high octane fuel to fuel different use cases. We think of them like the engines, whether it be for payers like HEDIS or quality or risk scores or gaps in care or patient population and so forth. So those are the kind of things we do at Diameter. Our strategy has really been following the data. So in terms of the markets we serve, we actually went after a relatively small, not growing market first, called health information exchanges or HIEs. And we went after that market first, not because it was big or growing, but because it had a wealth of data. I don't know if it was ever an official quote or not, but I think Willie Sutton was asked, why did you rob banks? And he said, because that's where the money was. And we went to HIEs because that's where the data was. From that, we cut our teeth, got scar tissue, got credibility, and then extended into the payer market. into the federal sector. We work with the VA. COVID actually has accelerated life insurance and reinsurance market. And we also have some relationships with select healthcare IT vendors. But one of the huge markets that we're quite excited about and looking to enter into the coming half of the year is in fact the life science and pharma market to support things like real world evidence, cohort selection, clinical trials by using and leveraging clean data from electronic health vendors. So let me stop there. I'll turn it back to you, Rob, and certainly happy to interact with the group on any other questions folks may have.
Great, thank you a lot, Eric. So, I'm really interested in digging in a little bit on the dynamics. Our subject is positioning your company for raising capital. So, what were some of the things that? And let's go back to Erika first. Erika, what were some of the things you did as you were putting your pitch deck together, creating a business plan, and so on? What are some of the things you did before you went out to talk to investors that you think really made a difference in kind of getting people interested enough to look further?
Well, I think that early-ish stage companies, probably the biggest challenge that we had to work through, as well as others that I've seen, is just making sure you get to that key inflection point. I think, Rob, you mentioned that, is just really, really pressure testing, like what's the right amount of capital to take in to get you to the next round, and so on and so forth. And that can be cut a lot of different ways, but it has to, bring you to a step inflection on what you're creating. So it sounds like very obvious and easy to do, but honestly, that's the thing that so many people get wrong. So there was a lot of work that we had to think about, like what's the kind of minimum amount we need, what's the maximum, kind of how we could kind of position that. And that was a fair amount of the work that we did early on to consider going forward.
Yeah, great. I mean, one of the conversations I often have with companies is, and I touched on it earlier, is you're going to be hiring people, building a team, and what to recruit people, what do you need? I mean, certainly having, Sean, you said you raised $180 million the last couple of rounds. That has to be really helpful in recruiting. And so Sean, why don't we just jump over to you there, because you started out with a small amount of capital.
Yep.
How did your fundraising plans, the capital you raised, the partners you have, impact your ability to recruit the people you needed?
Yeah, no, it definitely changed. So I think the first, like many small companies that raise less capital, you have the dreamer founders that have these big plans, and at the same time, the pragmatists around the table, the sort of, whatever you want to call it, the sort of adult supervision by the VCs sometimes to say, hey, we also want our money back at some point. And I think at some stage, the Series A, the Series B, I was in conversation with a lot of strategics, and we got some investment from strategics and stuff. I mean, it sounds like, Eric, you got some as well. The thought was, hey, these guys are going to kind of like exit, as they're doing pre-revenue to a strategic. It was kind of the common path, especially 4 years ago. And I think that's a different team, right? That's a different team in terms of, you built, prototype products. You got a really good sort of excitement from top pharma, but you're not talking about scaling up a global commercial team. And then, as the rest of the market, as a really interesting dynamic emerged where larger investors were becoming the chief competitor with larger strategics, right? So it was like, some super huge fund could kind of like fund you and give you a reasonable pre-money value that was above the strategic value. Like that kind of happened a couple of times, right? And then, when that happens, then people start to think, well, we could then scale, create that next inflection point, and that number gets to be much bigger. And it's kind of like everyone started saying, like, okay, now we have to build the team around that, and that team's like way different. But then those types of people, like, are a lot of the C-levels we brought on, as well as the global VPs, they don't want to work for a company that's going to be acquired next year. They want to be working for a company that they think are going to, like, IPO and do all this stuff. So it definitely, once we made the decision, hey, we're not going to go down this path, we're going to go down this path. And I'm not going to say it was like linear 1, 2, but they kind of happened at the last minute. then totally changes the quality of people we can get. We've always had quality people, but I think like you guys say, they use that term like different horses for different races. If I want to scale up 1,000 installed sites worldwide, that's a very different type of commercial team than like showing 8 real cool proof of concepts, which is more business development at 8 Pharma. So I think that's what changed a lot. And then just the positioning for us changed because, Eric, I was thinking back to 2012, like doing digital health, there was no cool trend for us. There was no raising that next round. There was no cool person to say, well, that guy just exited for a couple $2 billion. So like, please give us money pre-revenue. I think if that company was going concurrently with Flatiron Health exit, that person could say, oh, you can raise another 30 million with us. So we've kind of enjoyed a little bit of that in our space, but that's like a core thing that tends to rising tide for all ships, like companies like ours too, which then changes the investors that come in.
Yeah, thank you, Sean. I mean, this is kind of back to what I was saying before about alignment of interest. So, but that can be an evolving thing. As the most important thing. I mean, I think my model, which corresponds to other folks I know have been in the venture business a long time, is you bet on really good people, and if you want them to have good IP and an attractive market, but you bet on good people and you give them enough money, and then they're going to figure it out. And it's not a static thing. It changes, but you do end up matching people, investors, and then the market size you can afford. Having built a bigger organization, it kind of directs what markets you have to go after. You can no longer afford to go after little niche ones, unless you have a different strategy. You have some distributors that take some of that. So Eric, on sticking on the thinking about kind of the amount of capital raised and so on, and I guess I have a little bit of the advantage here that we spent a lot of time together and almost invested. But your insiders, you had one new investor, and then the insiders decided to invest more. The rule of thumb I always say to people is, hey, if the money's there, you should take it. But I think you've taken a little bit of a different approach. I think you as I recall, you kind of limited the size of multiple rounds here. And can you talk about now you've got the benefit of hindsight. Looking back, was that the right decision? Could you have moved faster if you'd taken more? You've done well, I think, on the valuation side. So
yeah, no, I mean, great question. It's always trying not to think too much of the counterfactuals of what might have been. But I think in the early days, to your point, Rob, we were frugal. We really bootstrapped. We tried to get some revenue, get value, prove the utility, and identify the market size before we raised any capital. And then we did limit the second round, as you know, and that was all filled by the insiders and Optum. But in this most recent, we actually had a number of interesting and competitive term sheets that sort of ratcheted up the terms and the amount of money we took. So we did actually take a little bit more. We went in, well, if I were to really go back to around a year ago this time, we weren't planning to raise money in 2020, but we didn't know what this pandemic was going to mean for the company. And at a board meeting, we decided to go out and just test the market, given where we were. And that actually resulted in interest that allowed us to close this summer. But I'm glad we raised the money we raised. I think to Sean's point, and by the way, before I forget, many of you may have heard or read this book, but it's a great book by Ben Horowitz, who called The Hard Thing About Hard Things. And I see Sean smiling, and perhaps others have read it, but there's some great just real world lessons, anecdotes, and advice in that book. And one of the things that always stuck with me says the great thing about building a company is the incredible people you can hire. And while people will come to a company for mission and vision and purpose, they also need to pay for their, they need to pay for their house and their kids' college, et cetera, et cetera. So having done the Series B, it did really allow us to bring on some incredible leaders, to Sean's point, that have scaled organizations. And I think it was Steve Jobs who said, A players hire A players and B players hire C players. And I've seen it happen a couple of times now where you just get these rock stars that can then reunite their band, so to speak, and just get out of their way and support them. But I found that to be a really important element for scaled growth and trust. and just culture, which we didn't talk about at all, but I would say culture is incredibly important because everyone you're going to try and hire has many opportunities, some which might pay more in our case, but they come to your company for mission, vision, and culture, as well as upside and economics.
Great. Thank you. Erika, question for you on managing the process. You know, it's early on. I mean, there's maybe smoke and mirrors isn't the right way to say it, but you know, you're trying to get people interested, keep them interested, and then get them off of sitting on their hands, right? You know, once a deal has momentum, then people think they're gonna miss out, and all of a sudden it's, you know, there's a waterfall of interest. But can you talk a little bit about managing that process and how you keep people interested and then kind of getting them over the finish line?
Well, I think it comes to maybe sort of the structure in the industry as a whole. There's the leaders and the followers, right? And a lot of people are followers. So like once it starts to come together, then there's all sorts of interest to jump in. So really, the reality is, if there's any time to spend your time and energy, it's with the people that are going to lead, that are going to actually put that first step forward, make sure that first term sheet is there, and so on and so forth. So I think, you know, sort of to the advice as a group, and I think that had worked well with us, is making sure that you can solidify that first lead commitment, and then other things will fall into place, kind of going from there.
Great. Kelly, how are we doing on questions? Do we have any questions from the audience? I see we have just a little over 5 minutes left, so.
The audience is invited. Please do put your questions into the chat box where they are more than welcome.
Okay, great. Let's go back over to Sean. Milestones. My experience has been over many deals over many years is that nobody ever makes their milestones. And you don't want to hold people to that. So I'm kind of allergic to milestone deals. You know, sometimes they get structured because people are having a hard time agreeing on evaluation or other deal terms, and said, okay, well, if we hit this milestone. But I think my take on it is that it just creates kind of a misalignment of interests. You know, the common shareholders, the people at the company, don't want to, you know, take excess dilution, and that may bias their decisions about whether to go after that milestone or to do something that now makes more sense. Does that resonate with any of your experience at IsoPlexis?
Yeah, I think, you know, it's such a cliche thing, but it's like everything takes longer, costs more, right? We always say that, and I think the question, there's two sides of it. Like, as you guys know, as you as a VC, as the entrepreneurs know, there's this side where you do have to be super disciplined in terms of getting to that sort of core inflection point where you can prove something to someone. But I liked the quote from like I think it's like Venrock's whatever, the guy who led a number of the life sciences omics deals, was like, the first two years of my company's lives, you know, they have no idea what they're doing, right? And they're just like figuring themselves out. By year 4, they're all amazing though. Like, so it's like, I feel like the first 2 years we were like really figuring out what those milestones should be. We put milestones down. We were like, that's a terrible business model. So we like, we sort of changed them, and then we changed them. And I think I see that happening so often amongst our peer group, that I do think there is a directionality though. Like, I think the thing that we came to was we have to see a lot of positive quarterly progress towards like a real business midterm that also well-established folks could buy into, whether it's a strategic or whether it's a, you know, later stage investor, but that we could lay out logically. And I think that was a ton of discovery on my part, listening to folks around our industry. And as you guys see these various business models come and go and come and go. I mean, like, there's certain companies in our industries with $10 billion valuations right now that are essentially, you know, pharma services business. They create antibodies for pharmas and those are very valuable companies that I remember that talking to some of those CEOs 5 years ago, they were told like, if you'll never raise a VC dollar if you try to do that business model. So it's like, I just think you have to show progress, but you're right. Milestones, a lot of companies, those first 2 years we're juggling, right? So it's tough on both ends, but I think if you meet and you show progress, that's the best you can do.
Yeah. Yeah. Let me kind of try to turn things around as I suggested I would in the beginning, and ask our panelists any questions for each other. Okay, then I'll jump back in.
Yes, I just sent a message to Mrs. Smith.
Yeah.
I don't know if she can.
Yeah, that's okay, Richard. I'll pass
Yes,
it
sir.
along. Thank you. Did any of you have terms in your deals that you were unhappy with but ended up having to accept? No, everybody's happy with their investors and the terms they negotiated.
It takes to get a deal done, Bob.
Yeah.
I think sometimes, like, it's true. It is true. Whatever it takes to get a deal done. I can't say structurally was I excited about every term that we had to sort of take. I can't speak to which one it was, but like definitely not. And I do think there are these weird some terms that stick with you through the rounds, because what happens is it's like this bad snowball, or it's this dirty snowball where it's like, then the next round they're like, I really want that term. That guy had that term. And the guy's like, well, he shouldn't get it, but I want to keep mine. So it's like this bad, you sort of, it is kicking the can forward if you allow some of these terms to stay. That being said, some of this stuff has stayed with us since our first round, and it hasn't changed that much. It's just been kind of a pain to explain to new investors. And so my philosophy was, in the end, it all works out if we do really well. But at that mid-stage sort of outcome where people are discussing that, it becomes a little dicey of a conversation. So
yeah. I mean, I see that all the time, is that people focus on those really unlikely events, and they don't. And I've been guilty of it too. You really have to think ahead. If you're an early stage investor, a smaller fund, even if you're, as we do, invest through the whole life cycle of a company, do you really want the big guys in the Series C and the Series D to have those same terms? And how will that affect you? I mean, the worst case is when people come in and they think, oh, the company's hurting a little bit. We're going to be, this next round is going to be senior to the earlier round. Well, then, what goes around comes around, and the next round comes, and then the new people, you find a good investor that's got a lot of money, and now they're going to be senior to, and you end up with this upside down preference table that's terrible for founders and the people that are doing the work. So I think that is one place where if you have the right lead investor and you can work closely with them to really think through those issues about not just this round, but let's position the company now for long-term success. Well, we've used up our hour. Really thank everybody for the audience for coming to visit. Our panelists, Sean, Erika, Eric, thank you very much for making time in your busy day to talk with everyone. BioCT for making it possible. Everyone enjoy the weekend and enjoy the spring. It's warm and kind of gray, but it'll be sunny before long. Take care, everyone.
Thank you for hosting.
thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thanks.
You're up.
Bye.
Yeah.